Eh. Wait, I don't need to empty anything. I can just drop it and open it up. It's easy.
Star Wars adventure to share with your kids. Only in Kinder Surprise.
This is Bruce, a baby name that has fallen out of the top 10 of late, but Bruce doesn't really care.
I don't really care.
He's been careful with money and raised 4 wonderful kids. One day, they may even appreciate him.
Ha!
Bruce may be retired.
But my brain isn't.
That's why he switched to everyday comprehensive car insurance.
Kerbal Space Program has seen something of a popularity resurgence with the success of Artemis 2, and we've seen a bit of an influx of new players to the community who are turning to the internet for tips on how to get good at this game. Now, I have over 1,000 videos on this channel at this point, and throughout the years I gave little nuggets of wisdom here and there, little tips and tricks that I've learned over the years, and I thought it might be nice to compile them into a singular video where hopefully players both young and old, both new and experienced, and both subscribed and not subscribed. Hopefully, if this video is any good, then that second group will go down in numbers. Anyway, here are 70. This started out as a top 10, it became a top 70, I'm sorry. 70 top tips for Kerbal Space Program. Number 26 will surprise you, as in it's a really important one. We begin with 10 basic tips for starting out that every player knows or should know. Number 1. Use CCAN to install mods for KSP. You're going to get mods recommended to you a lot over your career, and many mods require other mods to work, and some people find it hard to install them manually correctly, but CCAN is a program that literally does it all for you. You just click the mod you want, and then it'll install it along with all the other required mods, as well as recommending some other ones that you might like. Number 2, buy Kerbal Space Program, not Kerbal Space Program 2. Now, I might be stating the obvious here, but just in case, yes, there is a sequel to this game, but it was abandoned before it was finished, and yet it's still available for purchase. Let me be clear, that KSP 2 is inferior to KSP 1 in almost every single way. It runs worse, it looks worse, it's more expensive, there's less content, there's fewer parts and features, there's more bugs, the list goes on. The only improvements it made over KSP 1 were faster loading times and better sound design. That's it. Don't buy it. Number 3. Turn off Windows sticky keys. During things like moon landings, you'll find yourself pressing the shift key a lot when fine-tuning your thrust levels, and pressing shift too many times in a row brings up this pop-up that I'm sure has caused the loss of countless KSP crews over the years. Disable it and never live in fear of it again. Number 4, KSP 1.0 came out in 2015, so a long time ago, before 4K displays were as popular as they are now, so the game doesn't really work in 4K. The UI doesn't scale properly. However, there is a mod called 4KSP that fixes it, and so if you play in 4K, you need to get this mod. This is going to be like the only real mod recommendation in this list, by the way, just to warn you, but that's a pretty essential one. Number 5. Be aware that KSP 1.0 came out in April 2015, but was in early access before this point. You got to be mindful of any YouTube tutorials that were published before 1.0, as things like gravity turns, the nuclear engine's behavior, and air intake behavior, they all changed dramatically up to and including the 1.0 release. So best to be safe and only follow tutorials that were released after April 2015. Number 6, this game has quick saves. Press F5 to quick save and F9 to quick load, but you might not know that if you hold down Alt while pressing F5, you can create multiple named quick saves, and Alt plus F9 allows you to choose a specific quick save from that list. Number 7, if you can, buy the game on PC. I promise almost all modern computers and laptops can run it, and the experience is vastly superior to consoles, not just because of the controls, but also the mods available, craft file sharing, etc., and also the controls on console are awful. Number 8, there are different types of Kerbal, and they all do different things. Pilot Kerbals are useful because they will let you maintain full control of your spacecraft even when you're out of range of the Kerbal Space Center's communications, so you can still do things like plot maneuver nodes. Scientist Kerbals are super useful because they can restore the Mystery Goo and Science Junior experiment units, meaning you can earn way more science by utilizing the Scientist Kerbals. Bob Kerman, the first scientist you get, will be your main Kerbal when you start out a science mode playthrough because of this usefulness. Engineer Kerbals' main advantage is that they can do EVA construction, rearranging parts on a spacecraft, and they are also the only Kerbals that can use the EVA repair kit, an often slept on part that lets you repair breakable parts like wheels and so on. There are also technically 3 times in a row. Number 1, use CCAN to install mods for KSP. You're going to get mods recommended to you a lot over your career, and many mods require other mods to work, and some people find it hard to install them manually correctly, but CCAN is a program that literally does it all for you. Just click the mod you want, and then it'll install it along with all the other required mods, as well as recommending some other ones that you might like. Number 2, buy Kerbal Space Program, not Kerbal Space Program 2. Now, I might be stating the obvious here, but just in case, yes, there is a sequel to this game, but it was abandoned before it was finished, and yet it's still available for purchase. Let me be clear that KSP 2 is inferior to KSP 1 in almost every single way. It runs worse, it looks worse, it's more expensive, there's less content, there's fewer parts and features, there's more bugs, the list goes on. The only improvements it made over KSP 1 were faster loading times and better sound design. That's it. Don't buy it. Number 3, turn off Windows sticky keys during things like number 9.
This game, you're not ready.
Now, Minmus is easier than the Mun. Kerbin, the Earth analog in KSP, has 2 moons. The Mun, which is meant to be the in-game version of Earth's moon, and Minmus. Minmus seems harder at first glance because it's much further away and on a slightly inclined orbit, but trust me, for your first missions attempting to land somewhere other than Kerbin, Minmus is the far more forgiving moon to aim for. Number 10, space travel takes a long time, and one mission and back would take about 20 hours in real-time gameplay if not for Time Warp, a tool that lets you fast-forward time by using the period and comma keys. However, what if you're doing like a really long burn with a low-thrust engine? Well, you can actually also Time Warp when doing this. The game doesn't let you do this by default, but if you hold down Alt and then press the Time Warp buttons, it activates Physics Time Warp, allowing you to fast-forward up to 4 times faster than regular speed when burning engines or like traveling through an atmosphere. Just be careful that bugs can happen when larger craft go through Physics Time Warp when you're descending by parachute, so do use it with caution. Number 11. I lied, actually. There are 11 basic essential tips that start this list. I just can't count, apparently. And number 11 is to enable the Show Extended Burn Indicator. By default, when you plot a maneuver, the game tells you when you're about to reach it, but starting your burn at that point is not ideal unless the burn completes instantaneously, which it won't. Go to Main Menu, then click Settings, General, and Enable. Enable show extended burn indicator. What this does is it shows you a countdown of when to actually start your burn to get the most efficient results. The way it works is it basically splits your burn to be half and half either side of the plotted maneuver point. So for example, a 2-minute burn should be started 1 minute before the maneuver and end 1 minute after. There's a mod called Better Burn Time that adds an even more accurate burn indicator, but I don't think it's really required, to be honest. We're on to my tips for building vehicles in a good way. So, number 12. In the vehicle assembly building, learn your offset and rotate tools. They're these little buttons here, the two middle ones in this group of 4. The offset tool lets you move parts along the X, Y, and Z axes super easily, and it can be set to either global or relative orientation. The rotate tool is the same, except, get this, it lets you rotate parts instead. Number 13 is sort of a continuation of this, in that normally when you offset parts there is a limit, and eventually the game won't let you offset parts any further unless you hold down shift, in which case you can offset as much as you want to your heart's content. Number 14 is also kind of along the same pages. If you hold down shift and click your vessel with the offset tool selected, it lets you move the entire ship around, or alternatively just hold down shift with the place tool and you can just freely move the vehicle around with the mouse freely. Same goes for rotating the entire ship. Number 15. If you hold down Alt and click a part or subassembly with the place tool, it automatically duplicates it for you. Number 16. If you take a girder piece, or any piece really, then attach another girder, or again, any other real piece really, to that in 8-way symmetry, and place all of that in 8-way symmetry, you can now place things in 64-way symmetry. Simply take a part that you want in 64-way symmetry, touch it against the outer girders, and then boom! And this doesn't just work for 64-way symmetry. If you wanted, for example, 36-way symmetry instead, just place 6 girders in symmetry, then 6 girders on those. Basically, just multiply the 2 levels together. So in this case, 6 times 6 is 36. This is really useful for building ring structures in conjunction with tip 13 and using the unlimited offset by holding down shift when doing the offset tool. Number 17. Decouplers and separators are actually different, and you should almost always be using the decouplers, not the separators, because they're lighter and so they're more efficient, or use the engine plates, which work the same as decouplers. The actual difference between the decoupler and separator pieces is that when you activate a decoupler, it stays attached to whatever stage you just decoupled. A separator actually separates from both sides, which in my experience rarely actually offers any use because of the fact that it not only generates a pesky bit of unrecoverable debris in the form of that spent separator, but also it's kind of rendered fairly redundant by the fact that number 18, docking ports can also be used as decouplers. If you attach a docking port to a part, even if that part is not also a decoupler, it can be decoupled either by right-clicking it and pressing undock, or in the vehicle assembly building, you can right-click it and press enable staging, and now look, it comes up just like a decoupler in the staging window. There are stating on part is not also a decoupler under the operator couple. They act lighter, different, and you should the offset tool. Number 17. Decouplers and separators are actually different, and you should almost always be using the decouplers, not the separators, because they're lighter and so they're more efficient, or use the engine plates, which work the same as decouplers. The actual difference between the decoupler and separator pieces is that when you activate a decoupler, it stays attached to whatever stage you just decoupled. A separator actually separates from the side, which in my experience rarely actually offers any use because of the fact that it not only generates a pesky bit of unrecoverable debris in the form of that spent separator, but also it's kind of rendered fairly redundant by the fact that number 18, docking ports can also be used as decouplers. If you attach a docking port to a part, even if that part is not also a decoupler, it can be decoupled either by right-clicking it and pressing undock, or in the vehicle assembly building, you can right-click it and press enable staging, and now look, it comes up just like a decoupler in the staging window. There are very few instances where this method isn't preferable to using a separator piece. Just be careful to tick disable crossfeed if you don't want fuel travelling through the docking port, which is not the default behaviour for decouplers and separators, even though that can be enabled if you right-click and enable crossfeed. Number 19, bearings! They're great for covering your payload. If you right-click them, you can enable interstage nodes, which lets you stack separate payloads on top of each other more easily. And if this visually looks a bit weird, you can also enable the truss structure by right-clicking the fairing piece and clicking enable truss structure, which generates this nice looking scaffold. And don't worry, the vertical beams don't have collision, so they won't cause an issue if your payload clips through them or, when you're deploying the payload. Number 20, fairings can be terminated at any point by holding down Alt, and they don't also have to terminate in like a nose cone for the ship. They can terminate around any other cylindrical part, like a fuel tank, if the fairings are being used for interstages. Number 21, sub-assemblies is a fairly slept-on feature, but it's really useful. If you want to build a small lander that will be added to a larger vessel, simply build it, like this one here, then attach a part that isn't going to be part of the vehicle itself, like a command pod or something under the engine, then select the root tool and set that new part as your root. Now, you can click on the piece closest to that root part, and bada bing, bada boom, you can save it as a sub-assembly, which makes it into a sort of custom part that you can then add to another vehicle later on. Number 22. Parts can be attached either radially or via that green node thing in the BAB and spaceplane hangar. Sometimes it can be hard to get a piece to properly attach to the green node though, and it's easy to accidentally place it radially, and therefore slightly in the wrong place. You can disable radial attachment by holding down Alt though, making it much easier to snap the engine where it needs to snap. Number 23. Some parts don't have the ability to be radially attached though, but one part that can be radially attached is the super lightweight cubic octagonal strut piece. So if you want to radially place a part that normally can't be, then first attach a cubic octagonal strut and then attach whatever you want to that. Number 24. Bored of your choice of stock command pods? Did you know that there is a secret hidden Mark II size lander can available for use? To access it, click the Filter by Cross-Section button to the left of the parts window, then click Size 2, and within that list will be a lander can that you can use, and it has a full, unique interior and everything. This is down to it being a legacy from KSP's early access days. The devs later replaced it with the Mark II lander can that is viewable on the command pod selection by default, but to avoid breaking save files, the devs left the old version in the game buried in the Filter by Cross-Section area, so that any players' existing crafts that use it would still work okay. There really isn't any reason to use it these days, as it's much heavier than the newer lander can, but hey, I like the different interior layout, and sometimes it's just nice to have options, eh? Number 25. The proper lander can is a good example of the fact that many parts in the game have different variants. You can right-click them to see. The Mark II lander can be switched from its normal appearance to a more streamlined rectangular one, making it great for rovers. Another example is the Poodle engine, which can be switched to look more closely like the upper stage engine for the Ariane 5. Number 26. Advanced tweakables. This is the important one. Go into the game settings and enable them. This will give you more options, including, most notably, Auto Strut. Right-click parts, click Auto Strut, and then the game will add hidden supplementary joints between them to strengthen your rocket. Advanced tweakables also let you change things like landing leg spring and dampener strength, and the order in which engines will drain fuel from fuel tanks.
Prime Day is coming, 7 to 13 July.
Yeah, that's just the way you make me feel. That's just the way you make me feel.
Get that big deal feeling with exclusive deals for Prime members.
Number 27. When building planes, click the center of mass and aerodynamic overlay buttons on the bottom left. These will add a yellow ball that represents your center of mass and a blue ball with an arrow indicating your center of lift. If you're finding that your planes are flipping over, it's almost always because the center of lift is in front of the center of mass. Ideally, your planes should have the center of mass just in front of the center of lift for the plane to fly well. If not, then the plane will fly once. Number 28. In a similar vein, you want your rear landing gear to be close to the center of mass, just behind it, so that they can act as a fulcrum when you're pitching up. If the wheels are too far back, your plane won't be able to lift and overcome this weird placement, and it won't pitch up until you fly over the edge of the runway. Number 29. When placing landing gear, right-click the front gear and set your friction control to 0. This will stop your craft from sliding around and veering off course when taking off and when landing. Number 30. The nuclear engine is a bit confusing to new players because it's really heavy, really expensive, and it's really slow. But it's the best interplanetary engine in the game because it is extremely fuel efficient, and furthermore only requires liquid fuel, so you can use liquid fuel only tanks to build much smaller and much more efficient spacecraft compared to the other engines that require liquid fuel and oxidizer. If you want to look at how efficient an engine is, and whether or not it's best for atmospheric or vacuum flight, right-click it and look at the ISP value. The higher the number, the more efficient the engine, and the further you'll go with the fuel you pack. Some engines are optimized for the atmosphere, like the Vector, so will have a high ASL ISP number, while others, like the aforementioned nuclear engine, are terrible in the atmosphere, but excellent in the vacuum of space, so their ISP VAC number will be very high. Some engines are fairly decent at both, like the Aerospike engine. Number 31. What does this number mean? What does it mean? This is your ship or your stage's delta V. Delta means change and V means velocity. So in other words, it's how much you can alter your ship's velocity before you run out of fuel. This is handy to know when planning out missions. For example, getting from the surface of the Mun and back to Mun orbit takes about 580 meters per second of delta V. So when you're designing a lander, that's the number you want to aim to exceed, ideally packing a bit more than you need for some safety room. This is the basis of reading delta V maps, super useful tools that show you how much delta V is required for given missions and for each stage of the mission. They take a lot of the guesswork out of designing craft. So if you use the on-screen example here, if you want to get a probe from low Kerbin orbit to the surface of Moho, we do 1,710 plus 2,410 plus 870, giving us a total of 4,990 meters per second. That's the minimum amount of delta V that your ship needs to have. Ideally, again, you want a little bit more to account for things like, human inaccuracies and things like that. Anyway, number 32. By default, the delta V and thrust to weight ratio displayed in the vehicle assembly building is for taking off from the surface of Kerbin. So not very helpful if you want to see how well your nuclear-powered craft can lift off from Minmus. But if you click the little delta V button, delta is represented by that triangle by the way, you can change the display to be in a vacuum and relative to a different celestial body. Look at how those numbers change. Number 33, thrust to weight ratio, TWR. That's the thing I just said in tip 32, but what is it? Well, it's how much power your rocket has relative to its own mass. If it's below 1, and realistically you want it at least kind of 1.2 or more in most scenarios, you do not have enough power to move, at least lift off from a surface, less of an issue once you're in the vacuum of space. So add more engines and boosters until that number is higher than around 1.2 in order to get off the launch pad. Number 34. If it exists, then there's... that's the wrong list. When placing side boosters, like if you're building a sick Artemis II replica, for example, a good tip is to use the offset tool so that the bottom of the side boosters are slightly lower than the bottom of the central core, as this massively reduces the risk of them hitting. Tip is to use the... like if you're building a sick Artemis II replica, for example, a good tip is to use the offset tool so that the bottom of the side boosters are slightly lower than the bottom of the central core, as this massively reduces... reduces the risk of them hitting the core stage and destroying stuff when you detach them. Number 35. Asparagus staging is by far the most efficient means of keeping a rocket fueled. Here I have a rocket with 2 side boosters. If I hold down Alt and clone them, we can add 2 more, like this. Now I'm going to take the fuel line piece and click the first set of boosters, and then click the second set. I will then do the same, connecting the second boosters to the main core. Now what this does is it tells the game that we only want the rocket to pull fuel from the outer boosters so that when they detach, we stay fully filled with fuel, and likewise, when we detach the next set of boosters, the core stays fully fueled as well. This sequence can be as long as you want it to be. The game will always pull from the fuel tanks furthest away from the core in a sequence of tanks connected by fuel lines. You don't actually need to use the fuel lines if you enabled advanced tweakables from earlier, since you could just right-click the parts and set the fuel flow priority, but the fuel line is far more intuitive, so it's a lot easier to start out. So, number 36, ablative heat shields are really overpowered in KSP. Almost never amount of later, so you can save some weight and therefore increase extra efficiency quite great. You really don't need to get about it when you start returning to places like Jewel and Elu, and even then, it's often still more than you need. Number 37, yes, the DLC is worth it, in my opinion. So get it. That's the tip. Wait for it to be on sale if you want. It often goes for pennies, but if you can only afford to get one, then Breaking Ground is by far the superior of the two, as most of the content in Making History can be obtained with mods. Number 38, if you have Making History, then an easy way of testing landers is to build a mission that starts from the surface of the planet or moon that you're designing a lander for. This is especially useful for testing EVE landers, as EVE is actually harder to launch from than Kerbin, and so teleporting massive vessels to its surface for testing can often be a bit of a pain. So here I am in the VAB, let's press launch and start mission, and we're now starting on EVE, and you can change your starting location on the mission editor. I picked the sea because, sea level is a pretty good benchmark. Let's test the rocket out. It could take off at least.
Come home to the magic of a Tim Tam. What more could you wish for?
Number 39. If you want to make something sink, use service bays. There's this weird quirk with the physics here. Service bays retain their content's mass, but not their buoyancy. So in other words, if you add a load of fuel tanks to a service bay, it will float. But when you close the service bay doors, all that buoyancy goes away, but the mass does not, and you will sink. This is particularly useful for building underwater bases and submarines. Number 40. Landers and bases sliding around, use grip pads. These pieces do exactly what they say. They will grip the surface that you land on, and you won't slide, unlike the landing gear pieces. The reason that you don't slide with the grip pads, but you somehow do slide with the landing gear is not some decision that was made. It's just another remnant of KSP's early access development. Landing legs were added very early on, and the sliding around wasn't really thought about. Grip pads were added in one of the final updates of the game in order to address players' complaints about the landed vessels sliding around. Why the grippiness could be applied to the landing gear too, I don't know. I'm not a game dev, but that's the story anyway. Number 41. Kraken drives are magical engines that give you infinite range and infinite fuel. There are many available. A favourite of mine is the Cal overclock drive, but by far the easiest one is the Zombie Pigspun drive, named after the Redditor who discovered it. Simply place two docking ports facing each other, set the magnet force of the posterior ports to 100 and the anterior ports to 0, and the ports will just pull you along with their own magnetic force for free. I've done a full video explaining this further and flying a space plane to EVE with it and back, so I'll link a card to that on screen if you want to know more about this one. And wow, that took ages, but those are all my tips for building vessels in KSP. Now I want to touch on networking in this game, as it's not well too understood. So, number 42, how the heck do relays work? Okay, so this is actually Editor Matt stepping in. I think relays are actually so obscure and so misunderstood or underutilized that I've decided to actually split this topic off to be its own video, so we're going to skip past tips 42, 43 and 44 so that I can flesh them out a bit better in their own video. So, sorry about that. Anyway, Editor Matt out, back to the current video. Number 45. When you're trying to fly a plane, or anything really, back to the Kerbal Space Center, or any other location on Kerbin, you can right-click that place on the map screen and click Activate Navigation. It'll then appear as a little icon on your nav ball to make navigating to it much easier. And those are my tips on networking features. Laughably short compared to the building tips, I guess. But anyway, here are some tips now about flying things in Kerbal Space Program. Number 46. You can easily launch aquatic vessels from the Cove launch site in Kerbal Space Program. By default, this isn't available, but just build any sort of aircraft, take off from the runway, and then turn left and just hug the coastline north. Within a couple of minutes, you'll see a cluster of buildings appear, get nice and close to them, and you'll unlock the Cove launch site. To use it, hover over the launch button in the vehicle assembly building, and then you can select it from the drop-down menu, making launching of boats and seaplanes much easier. There are actually a bunch of other hidden launch sites that are unlocked in a similar manner. I've done a full video on how to find them, which I'll link by that card on screen and down in the description, but the Cove launch site is the most useful because it has this very unique feature of being able to launch stuff directly into the sea. Number 47, press Alt plus F12. This brings up this menu here, and it has lots of useful features. You can enable cheats like infinite fuel and infinite electricity, as well as disable things like features. You can enable cheats like infinite fuel and